Welcome to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. I hope you're enjoying your day as you're listening to this week's podcast. If you are a new listener to this podcast, I want to say thank you and welcome. And if you are a returning listener to Full-Time Yoga Teacher, I'm so excited that you are back listening to this podcast again. I have a quick announcement today before we get started on today's conversation. I have my final workshop coming up for my mentorship program for yoga teachers. And this workshop is a continuing education workshop for particularly yoga teacher, but it is also going to be great for Pilates or a personal trainer or any kind of movement professionals, movement instructors, or even somebody who's just interested in anatomy and movement science. So this workshop is called Busting Yoga Alignment Myth, Understanding Movement Science Through Physical Therapy Lens. And this workshop is going to be taught by Thomas. And Thomas is a local Long Beach physical therapist that I have been shadowing for the past several months. I don't think I shared about this news on the podcast before, but I have always wanted to shadow a PT or work as a PT aide or just kind of be around PT when they're working and just kind of be the fly on the wall and learn and observe the work that they do. That's always been something I have been fascinated about and wanting to kind of get deeper into learning. So when I met Thomas, I asked him if I could shadow him, and he was very generous and open to say yes. And ever since then, I've been trying to shadow him and his work at his PT office in Long Beach called Zenith once a week. And what I think is special about Thomas, his work, and his PT office is that you get a whole hour with the physical therapist when you make an appointment at Zenith's physical therapy office. A lot of the PT office, you get to meet with PT for like 10-15 minutes during the evaluation, and they kind of send you off to their assistant or aide. But at Zenith Performance, Thomas and his business partner, Hayden, they see you for the full hour. It's one-on-one. They listen to you. They take notes. They really want to help every single one of their patients, and they spend a whole hour one-on-one with you for every single sessions, whether it's evaluation or follow-up ongoing sessions. And I think that's so great because a lot of time we feel like we're not heard or we're not really seen in the medical world. And I love that at Zenith's Performance. And with Thomas, he really cares about his patients so much. And I have been learning so much observing and shadowing him. And I've also been learning so much about how strength training is so important to anyone in any stage of life, but also how strength training can be a therapeutic modality to heal us from our physical injuries. So anyway, I can kind of go on and on about my experience of shadowing Thomas for the last several months. It's been really fun for me, and I have been learning so much, and I definitely want to continue shadowing him. But that is why I invited him to be the guest teacher for my mentorship program for yoga teachers. He is not a yoga teacher himself, but he has extensive background in physical therapy and strength training and working with older adults, working with people with different injuries, pain level. And it has been very eye-opening for me to shadow him and kind of just observe. So I know for sure you will also enjoy this workshop, as well as you are going to learn a lot. And I wanted to invite him to teach us a workshop on some of the yoga alignment cues that we've been told over and over. This is how it must be. This is how it should be done. But does it actually make sense from movement science perspective? So that is why I'm bringing him on to kind of bust some yoga alignment myth. Obviously, we're not going to have time to bust all the myth out there, but we have chosen a handful of very common yoga alignment cues and myth that exist, and he is going to elaborate and explain the movement science through the physical therapy lens, which I am very much excited for this workshop. So this workshop is happening in person December 6th, which is first Saturday of December, from 2 to 4 p.m. in Long Beach. It's in person, but if you don't live near Long Beach, but you still want to join the workshop, it'll be live streamed on Zoom, so you can still join if you get Zoom. And it also will be recorded, so if you want to watch the recording later, you can purchase the recording later. It's sliding scale from $10 to $60, so that's $10 to $60. Very accessible and affordable to anyone. I really invite you to kind of expand your perspectives on how you see movement and body and how we think about some of the yoga poses. So this workshop is called Busting Yoga Alignment Myth, Understanding Movement Science Through a Physical Therapy Lens with Thomas. I'll put the link on the show notes for you to click to register, or if you just want to read the description a little bit more, those links will be on there. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me and let me know. That's all the announcement I have for this week. So let's get started on today's conversation. So today's conversation is the second of the mini series that Olga and I recorded. Last week, Olga and I talked about why anatomy is so important for yoga teachers to learn, and what was our experience of anatomy in our 200-hour teacher training program, as well as what was our driving force on why we wanted to keep on learning and going deep into anatomy. We also shared a lot of cool resources on the trainings that we have taken in the past that we really recommend. So that was last week's episode. If you haven't listened to that yet, go ahead and go back and listen to last week's episode. And for this week, we are talking about anatomical variation as well as how movement works. And I love the topic of talking about anatomical variation. You can hear it in our excitement and our conversation in the recording, but anatomical variation really changed my perspective and the way I see my students' body as well as my body. And the knowledge of anatomical variation, I kind of share in the conversation, but it really freed me. It kind of liberated me from these expectations that if I stretch hard enough, if I do yoga every day for long enough, I am going to be able to do certain type of yoga poses. And knowledge and studying about anatomical variation kind of freed me from that belief system that may not always be the case. And if you continue listening to our conversation, we'll go kind of deep and geeky into the anatomical variation. So I hope you enjoy this week's conversation I had with Olga, and I will speak to you on the other side. Welcome back, Olga, to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. This is second of the mini series that Olga and I are chatting about why study anatomy as a yoga teacher. And last week's episode, we talked about why we're so interested in anatomy, what got us into really wanting to learn about anatomy and become anatomy geeks, and also our experience of 200-hour teacher training and how anatomy was presented in our training, as well as we kind of gave a lot of recommendations on great anatomy resources and online courses that we have taken part in. So go check out that episode out if you haven't yet. And today, on the part 2 of this mini series, we're talking about anatomical variation as well as movement. So let's chat about anatomical variation. What do you think anatomical variation is?
Yeah, so fascinating and such a broad topic. And so in previous episodes, we mentioned the anatomical variation as something that's really helpful, and that within the yin community is a really popular subject, as it should be. And so the basics of anatomical variation is that for our purposes in yoga and movement is that people's bodies differ. Not everyone looks like the skeleton that you have in the studio in your 200-hour. You're looking at the hip sockets and the shoulder sockets and the spine. Not everyone has the exact copy of this model in their body. Yeah, so our hip sockets can have different shapes. The length of our bones can be different. The angles of certain parts of our bodies can be different. Our spine, our vertebra, can have differences from one person to the next. There are differences in the shoulder. Literally everywhere you look, there might be bony structural differences, but also there's differences in like what your soft tissue can achieve. So not everyone will be super flexible, even if they practice a lot. And some people are very naturally very flexible without any practice. So there's such a spectrum of what bodies can and can't do. And the reason for that is often that the structure is different from person to person.
Yes, I love everything that you said. And when I first learned this, it freed me. It liberated me finally. Because I used to think like I just had to stretch more or do more yoga. I wasn't working hard enough. And that's why I wasn't able to attain certain range of motion in certain joints, or I wasn't able to do a certain pose or the shape that I was striving for. And that was the message I was keep getting from my teachers. So I just believe that. And I used to also get this message like, oh, stop doing other movement activities. That's tightening you up. So that's why you're not able to do pose. Like stop lifting weights, running. Like those kind of messages are the ones that I used to hear and receive, and I really believed it. It always felt like I wasn't working hard enough. And when I started learning about anatomic variation, like it really liberated me. I'm like, oh my God, like it's not because I'm not working hard enough. And there's so much reason of why it could be. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you felt when you first learned about it. Did you have those kind of belief system that you were taught?
Yeah, so like again mentioned in the previous episode, in dance training, that's where I started my movement practice. The teachers weren't really, generally speaking, aware of anatomical variation, and the principle was the same. If you're not practice enough, you're not going to get to point X, whatever that point is. And I think similarly to you, when I started researching it on my own, it was like a breakthrough for me to understand, to test my hips specifically and my hamstrings and notice the ranges of motion that are available, and actually now reframe how I understood myself as a mover and what it meant for me to improve, to embody dance technique, what we call alignment in yoga. And that shift in thinking really allows you to be the best mover that you can be and feel comfortable while you're doing it. So it takes away the discomfort and the expectation that you're going to look like someone else in the room. And that's just so freeing.
Yes, it is so freeing. And as a yoga teacher and also yoga teacher trainer, like that is one of the biggest message I want to convey and teach to this like new upcoming teachers. Or like I could be just teaching a group class and I want to like that's such a huge important message for me that I want my students to also learn and feel that it's not because you're not working hard enough. Like there's a difference in our body structures and bone shapes, and all that has an effect on how we practice our yoga or the asana. And I think that's such a important part of the message for sure. And I think we talked about it in the last episode, but Paul Greeley's website, which I'll link in the show notes, have amazing photos of real human bones, and shows you like femur bone from like 8 different people and how different each bones can be. Like I think you said the shape or the angle, the depth of the hip socket, like all these things that can have effect on how certain yoga pose may look on certain body type than others. And that is such a great resource. And I love that he has a lot of those resources free for anybody to look at. And I was interested when you said it's very commonly talked about in the yin world, but not so much in the other yoga world.
Yeah, I think it's catching up slowly, but they have, I think, pioneered this approach in yoga. Maybe not, but it feels like they have such focus on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else about the anatomical variation? Maybe some examples. Let's give some
Yeah.
example.
My favorite example is the hip socket, I think, and hip
Mhm,
flexion. So to start with the hip socket, actually, this is related to each other. But your hip socket is not necessarily going to be round and even and look like a perfect dome or like concave sort of shape.
mhm,
Your hip socket could be built up slightly in certain areas and less in different areas. So now, if
mhm,
you're moving the thigh bone against this hip socket, your range of motion might differ. You might be stopped at a certain angle in your
mhm,
rotation, for example, but you might have a
mhm,
lot of movement in flexion. So you're like going forward, like
mhm,
flexing at the hip. Um,
mhm.
and I think that's one of my favorite examples because we do so much external rotation in yoga as we do in dance as well.
Yeah.
And literally, the structure of your hip can prevent you from going further in particular poses. For example, pigeon is such a great example of this. Not
Yeah.
everyone can have their 90-degree angle between the foot and the
Yeah.
thigh. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some people need to really put that like quite underneath themselves to
Yes.
limit the amount of rotation that is required of them. And then they still feel a nice stretch, which is really what we're after. That sensation is still there
Mhm.
without discomfort potentially. So that's my
Yes.
favorite example. Do you have one that you really like?
Yes, but I just want to touch on the pigeon part. I see so many students trying to kind of force their legs to become that 90-degree angle and pigeon. Reclined pigeon and yeah, I think maybe Karen and I talked about this on the previous episodes before, but you don't force your body, your legs, your knees to try to get to that 90-degree. Like what Olga just says, for some people anatomically that is just not going to happen. So more you force it, it could be harmful. So definitely that's a great example. I like the example of staying with the hips, like where hip sockets are facing and how with some people's hip sockets are facing more out to the side and some people's hip sockets are facing a little bit more forward in an angle and how that could have effect on like Baddha Konasana or maybe butterfly pose might be another
Yeah.
name. You know, some people's knees are really flat on the ground versus some people's knees are really lifted off the ground. And like I said, it's not only just bones, like soft tissues is also going to have effect on it. But rather than thinking you're not good enough because your knees are way off the ground or you're not working hard enough because your knees are nowhere close to the ground, just know that like everyone's the depth of the hip socket, where the hip sockets are facing is going to be different. And that can also have an effect on how low your knees can go in those poses. And another part that's interesting is like one hip socket can have one direction or shape and other hip socket can have slightly different. So you might notice a difference between your right and left side as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Mm,
I think the favorite question of Bernie Clark is what's stopping you? So when you see someone in a pose or yourself in a pose, you can ask that question and try to deduct whether it's your bony structure. Is it that you still can build some more flexibility in this position? Is there
mhm,
something else? Sometimes it can be your own body that's in the way of doing something, which is also like a very valid point to remember.
mhm.
And I think that's just a really great helpful thing for teaching.
Mhm. So true. And another one I like is the shoulder blades, the scapula. When you look at the bones of the scapula in Paul Greeley's website, um, what's the name of that bone that becomes almost like a roof at the top of the shoulder blades, the one
Like,
edge
yeah,
of the shoulder blades? What
acromion
is it?
process?
Yes, acromion process. Some people's acromion process is it comes out more.
Yes.
It becomes like a big roof. It's like, almost like umbrella
Yeah.
over your arm bone, the humerus. And in some people's acromion process is a lot more like shallow and shorter.
Yeah.
So how that can possibly have effect on how easily you can raise your arms overhead versus some people might have a little more limitations or their limit comes a little quicker sooner than others.
Yeah, and I think, that's so helpful in so many different ways. So it like you're saying, it helps us cue better. It helps us to, when we cue, remember that I might not give a very specific blanket cue for this because people's bodies will do it differently. So maybe I rephrase how I say this cue in order for people to be more comfortable and empowered.
Yeah.
Um, but also, it just allows you to come up with options. When you're sequencing your class, at the back of your head, you're like, in this pose, we're in pigeon and we're going from pigeon to X pose. What do I need to remember? Like, what do I want to have in my back pocket to make sure that everyone's comfortable? And I think that's a very, very useful thing. How do you find it helpful in your teaching?
Yeah, definitely. I try to give a lot of options, like you said, like try it with the prop here or try it like this way. And for example, in the pigeon thing, I try to say, you don't have to have your knees in 90 degree. If I see somebody trying it, like I say, like everybody has a different shaped bones and different angles going to work better for different body types. So I try to really highlight everyone's body's different and the shape of the asana, the pose is going to look different on different body type. And that is completely normal and completely okay. And I try to have message of like there's no need to like force yourself to fit into a specific shape that might not be right for your body. So really kind of reminding students of that a couple times in different poses or a different time of the class. And another thing I think that's kind of fun is like really doing some movements that I ask students to explore their range of motion in some very simple movement and see like, okay, so this is your range that you have for today, for now. And it might change over time. It might change over class or not. It may not change. And that exploration of how much range of motion they can find in certain joint. And then I kind of try to bring that back up. And later in the sequence where we're doing different poses and remind them about that range of motion that they found earlier.
Yeah, and I think that really helps us make yoga more accessible if we understand not only that people differ, but also how that might manifest in a yoga practice and how we might help them in that situation. And not only
Mm-hmm.
because it helps people with injury prevention and just increases their comfort in a pose, but
Mm-hmm.
also because we're inviting people to inquire about their bodies. We're not there
Mm-hmm.
dictating what should happen. We're just asking questions and inviting them to become more familiar with the body that they live in. And I think that's such a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful gift that we can give people as yoga teachers.
Yes, it's so true. And rather than teaching, like, do it this way or else, inviting in exploration for students so they can get to know their body and their ranges of motion where they feel like that's their edge versus they feel like they can safely try a little bit more. I think that's as a teacher, we don't live in their body, so we can't dictate that. But we can always give them this time to explore and inquire and ask questions so they can get to know their body best. And that's something I encourage everyone, like you as a teacher, to also explore that yourself.
Yeah, for your own body, and also
Right.
the more bodies you see, the more you can anticipate what might be happening, and that's also quite
Mhm.
useful because you can a bit more like quickly come up with why this might be happening and give a solution, a couple of solutions perhaps to see which one's working. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think another thing is like as a teacher, sometimes we feel like we have to have the answers. Sometimes like I don't know. And I usually will say like, oh, let's explore it together. Like try this way. How does it feel? Try it this way. How does that feel? Try this prop. How does this feel? And sometimes that kind of exploration is probably best in private yoga or small groups or maybe after class when you can have a little time one-on-one with the students who have questions. It's hard to do just like one-on-one inquiry, exploration to troubleshoot that specific student's body type in the middle of the group class. But there's totally opportunity to do that after class or before class with a student. But I think that's sometimes I don't know the answer, but we can like, all right, let's try it together. Let's try this way. Let's try that way. I think is also such a good um, mindset to have. You don't have to have
Yeah.
all the answers.
I think having this knowledge and education and having seen a lot of people, it gives you like a compass. It doesn't necessarily give you
Mhm.
the answers, but it does give you a compass. Let's try this. And you try this. And oftentimes it might work, but actually sometimes it won't. And that makes you humble.
Mm.
teacher to be like, well, okay, what else can we try? Like you say,
Yeah.
and invite that exploration from both of our
Yeah.
sides, us with the student. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And even like in a one-on-one or small group setting, I think it's great to ask like, how does it feel in your body? Like, where do you feel it? Where do you feel the tightness or where do you feel the restriction? Because another thing I really like to highlight when I'm teaching teachers is that how you feel in your body, we can't assume that's how everybody else feels in that specific pose or shape. I could feel my hamstring stretching really so much in one pose, but for another student, they might not feel the hamstring stretch at all. Maybe they feel the lower back stretch, So rather than assuming your students are feeling in the same place, in the same sensation that your body feels, it's fun to explore that and ask, like, where do you feel it? How does it feel for you? Not assuming certain sensations or set of expectations on how your students are feeling in each pose or movement.
Definitely. And that probably extends from anatomy also into other types of feelings, where if you were to assume that everyone's going to feel confident in a back bend or have that sense of confidence, it might happen
Yeah.
to some people, but not everyone, which kind of is a
Yes.
different topic, really, but is related to variation.
Yes, it's so true. Oh my God. I mean, the whole thing of like forward fold is calming and back bend is energizing possibly could be true for many people, but also could be the opposite for some people? So yeah,
Yeah.
we just can't assume like a blanket statement on anyone or anything. We went slightly off topic, but I love talking about this stuff. But anything about anatomical variation before we move on to the movement?
No, I think we covered a lot here.
Yeah. And I love talking about the anatomical variation. Hopefully, we gave a lot of good examples and how we address it in class setting. So next, we want to talk about how the body creates movement. And where do you want to start us off with this one?
It's such an amazing part of anatomy. And I think this one really focuses on the isolation of parts that you can
Hmm.
later on build back up. But perhaps it helps to look at movement and then yoga poses in
Hmm.
relationship to what muscles are doing what in that moment, what's
Hmm.
being activated, what's being stretched, what type of contraction is happening, how we got isometric, eccentric, concentric.
Hmm.
Um, what else? What ranges of motion we're in and how that relates across different poses.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think what was there's so much you said there, but definitely like it's interesting to think about when we move a joint, what muscle is contracting, what muscle is lengthening when let's, for example, flex your elbows, or when you bend your knees, when you hinge forward from your hips. I think that can be very helpful. I think we just had a sequencing workshop with Karen, and Karen and I did a 3-part series on sequencing. But even just knowing something simple as that in this pose, hip flexion is happening, which means this muscles are being lengthened and this muscles being shortening. Like even just simple information and knowledge about that can really help us sequence a yoga class as well, or how we think about sequencing.
Yeah, definitely. That's just such a useful skill to have as a yoga teacher.
Mhm.
If you're choosing to teach movement, because obviously you don't have to necessarily do that in your yoga classes, but if you do, it allows you to dissect not only the poses but also the transitions that you're gonna
Mhm.
put in your class, and just I
Mhm.
think most importantly make a layered educational experience for people as well.
Mhm. Yeah. And I'm curious, how do you use the knowledge of different stretch in your class, like eccentric stretch or concentric stretch? Like, what are some ways, or maybe explain those to the listener in a very simple, digestible way, and how that comes into how you teach?
Yeah. So in a textbook, oftentimes you will get this idea that a muscle has one job, and that is the concentric contraction. That's often how muscles are described. Yeah. So your quads will extend your knee, right?
Mhm.
But what we need to add to this is really how your body is in relationship to gravity in this moment in time. And what do you need to do to be in the position that you're in? Yeah. So if you're
Mhm.
going to a forward fold really slowly from standing, you're having an eccentric contraction of your hamstrings. So instead of your hip flexors working, they are really assisted by gravity in that situation. So what needs to happen is the back of your leg, your hamstrings, are decelerating this movement. So despite that you're going into hip flexion, you've got your hamstrings working eccentrically. And I think that's such a key thing to understand, that how your body is in relationship to gravity will influence what muscle contractions you're seeing in a given pose.
So true. Such a great example. Because if you were laying down on your back and slowly lift your legs up towards the ceiling, your relationship to gravity and the same shape, same movement at the hip joint that you're doing is gonna be quite different experience.
Yeah, you will be using your hip flexors then to lift the leg up if it's done actively.
Mm-hmm. And how do you try to use that or bring that into the way you teach or way you sequence?
Yeah, so I think depending how you like to go about sequencing, whether you're going
Mhm.
for a peak pose sequencing or you're maybe just picking an action that you want to work on that day, or a muscle that you want to work on, yeah? So if you're
Yeah.
picking a peak pose, for example,
Mhm.
let's say dancer pose, then you can
Mhm.
look at it and really dissect it. And before you even make your class sequence, you can have a look. What do I see happening in this, and how can we prep this ahead of time so that people have a more comfortable experience then going into dancer pose? Yeah, so maybe you're
Mhm.
looking at that eccentric hamstring contraction, and how can you introduce that a bit sooner? Maybe you're looking at your glute med and that hip stability that allows you to stay on one leg and feel,
Mhm.
more stable there. Maybe you're looking at your pecs because the arm is reaching back behind you. You've got this opening through the chest. And
Yeah.
obviously, maybe you're looking at the back bends. I
Mhm.
think you are looking at the back bends, definitely, in dancer pose. So you already have like 5 or 6 different things that you can introduce ahead of time. And you can
Yeah.
also pick one of them that's going to be your like spotlight that week. Maybe you're reaching back with your arm and opening the chest and retracting your shoulder blades. Maybe that's your main focus, but you
Yeah.
still have to prep the dancer pose. The whole body needs to be prepped ahead of time.
Mhm. Yeah, it's such a great example, and dancer's pose can be such a, like, interesting, complex pose when you start to think about that. It's like, okay, I have to make sure I prep the spine and the shoulders and the pec, and then also your hip
The
flexors and
foot.
then your hamstring and then the balancing aspect. So when you think about it like that, it's there's a lot to think about. But like you said, rather than trying to bring it all in one class, sometimes it's nice to just choose one spot as your focus. And then maybe next week you do the same peak pose, but the focus is in a different area of the body. So there's so many ways we can play around with how we choose to teach or sequence or theme or focus the class, depending on those like movements.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think also understanding how movement works helps you to create classes in a different way. So you could, for example, let's say, just off the top of my head, like um, hip stability, and say you want to look at like gluteus medius and how it's like abducting the leg and then stretching when you're adducting the leg, right? So
Mhm.
you can have a whole class playing around it with this concept. That's not necessarily a peak pose class, but because you have this ownership of how the body moves, you can understand then that you can do that in a yoga class and what poses you need to pick for that to all
Mhm.
make sense to people.
Mhm. Yeah, so true. You know what, Olga, this is such a great conversation after the sequencing workshop we did with Karen. What we're talking about is so relatable to um that sequencing workshop and how Karen kind of taught us how to start thinking about sequencing. So this is great. I hope listeners are also enjoying it as well. Is there anything in this topic of movements that you want to share or you want to leave the students with before we wrap up this week's
Yeah,
episode?
sure. I think how it's helpful is such a useful thing to
Mm,
know. And
yeah.
we've covered quite a lot of that already. So we're dissecting poses, we can dissect transitions, we can see what's happening in other movement modalities, like what's happening in a
Mhm.
squat. Suddenly you understand a squat, despite never having, done gym training.
Mhm.
Um, it also helps you see what people are doing a little bit more. So if someone's popping that hip out, you will know, okay, glute med, hug that hip in and activate on that side to make them feel perhaps more stable or uncomfortable in their pose. And obviously that allows us to educate people about their bodies, which is, again, such a wonderful thing we can do. I think one of the important things also, it helps you make your classes balanced as well as your class curriculums. So once you've prepped your peak pose or your range of motion that you're going to focus on, you will know that the rest of your class is well balanced. And if it isn't, which it doesn't have to always be, you will know that over your 6-week block, you have covered quite a lot so that you have moved the body in such varied ways, instead of focusing on one range of motion all the time and repeating and repeating and repeating the same hamstring flexibility or rotation of the hip. So I think that's really valuable just for the well-being of the students.
Yes, so true. I love everything that you shared. So I hope this conversation got the listeners thinking, their brain starting to move in directions that hopefully is exciting and fun to think about anatomy in. So thank you so much for this week's conversation on variation, anatomical variation, and the movement of the body. So next week, we will be back again for the third and final episode of this mini-series. So thank you so much, Olga.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's conversation with Olga. I hope you enjoyed our conversation about anatomical variation and also looking at movements. I'm going to leave a link to Paul Greeley's website on the show notes. So we referenced him a lot in this conversation about these photos of bones that he uses to educate his students, and these photos of the real human bones are available free as a free resources on Paul Greeley's website. So I'm going to put the link to his website on the show notes, and I really encourage you all to go check those photos out. He also have quite a short online educational class or courses workshop on there that I also recommend as well. And lastly, I want to remind you all about the upcoming continuing education workshop for yoga teachers that I am hosting, called Busting Yoga Alignment Myth, Understanding Movement Science Through a Physical Therapy Lens. And that workshop will be taught by Thomas, who is a doctor of physical therapy local here in Long Beach. And it's going to be in-person workshop December 6th, Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. in Long Beach, or you can join via live stream from any time zone, or you can watch the recording later. All of my past workshops recordings are available on my website. So if any of the past workshop, like hypermobility workshop or intentional sequencing workshop, those workshops, if you want to purchase the recording and watch the recording, you are more than welcome to go to my website, go to my on-demand library page, scroll down to mentorship, and you'll see the recorded workshop from the past guest teachers. So those are all there for you all if you want those resources and if you missed the live workshop. But all the information you need will be in the show notes, as well as how to contact me, how to reach out to me, and how to reach Olga. You can always message me through my website, www.reikayoga.com, or message me on Instagram at reikayoga, REIKAYOGA. And please leave me a review or stars or subscribe or anything you can do on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast from. That would be super helpful. But what's most going to be helpful, and I'm going to be very grateful if you do, is if you could share this podcast with someone you know, a friend, a yoga teacher, or your coworkers. And if you want to share it on social media, please share it on social media, and you can always tag me at Reika Yoga. So that is it from me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll be back next week for the third and final series with Olga. Talk to you soon. Bye.